And I think Alabama's defense right now is playing with confidence. They believe they're going to make big plays. I think they're playing with a ton of energy and confidence right now going into this LSU game. And this Alabama team might be starting to regain their confidence at the right time.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan. I'm here with Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. And Matt, Alabama won this week, and they won convincingly. They beat Missouri 34-0 in their first SEC shutout since 2020. It was a cool atmosphere in Bryant-Denny Stadium. I was in the building, and they needed this. Like, this was just a solid all-around win. They were productive on offense. The defense got a shutout. They looked good. They were flying around. They played that swarm defense. They got pressure on the quarterbacks because they played against 3 of them on Saturday. But this is just something that Kalen DeBoer, Jaylen Milroe, Kane Womack, like this entire team, they just needed a game like this. And so, Matt, I mean, the first question coming away from this game was, I mean, there were so many question marks when it comes to Alabama anyway. But the fact that they played against a ranked SEC opponent, banged up as they were, and we'll talk about that, but they beat them 34-0. Like, that's as convincing as it gets in conference play. So my first question for you, is Alabama actually okay? They're 6-2 right now.
Well, that's a very complicated question because, as we know, not everybody is facing the same circumstances going forward from this point in the season. The month of November looks very different depending on what your schedule is in the SEC. There are some wildly different. I would say it's like if there was a marathon and some of the guys get to run downhill for the last 10 miles and some guys have to run uphill. And I would say Alabama's is at least somewhat uphill the rest of the way. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes maybe. But look, that we know almost nothing seemed to be working when they were playing Vanderbilt. They were completely out of sorts. They lost all their confidence. They couldn't get a stop on defense. Some good things happening on offense, but that seemed to vanish the following 2 weeks against South Carolina and Tennessee. It really, I would say, maybe looked similar at the start of this game. The first quarter of this game was very ugly. And it didn't look like there'd been any progress made. And something happened at some point. And maybe it was just having the break of Brady Cook going down and not really being able to play full strength in this game. But it seemed like a fire got lit at some point. And Alabama's defense, which played very admirably a week ago at Tennessee in a loss, started to come up with big play after big play in this game. They started to actually get stops on third down, something we have really not seen them do all season long. And then it started turning into something on the offensive side of the football too. It by no means was this a complete offensive performance, but they did something good. Something worked for once. They found a consistent attack on the ground, and they were able to turn that into points. It feels like this is pretty basic stuff, but for whatever reason, this Alabama team was not succeeding at a lot of very basic things at the sport so far this season. And they started to figure out at least some of them on the offensive side of the ball yesterday.
Yeah, I think something they really need to figure out is running the ball, right? Like, Alabama, obviously under Nick Saban, their MO for so many years was running the damn ball, right? Like, that's what fans wanted them to do. That's what coaches have said in retrospect. If we could run the ball more, players have said. We've had Mike Johnson on here before, and he screams run the ball at the TV when he's watching it. And so that's something that this team has struggled to do in the traditional sense, right? Like, you have to look at who's under center in terms of Jaylen Milroe, a guy who is just a weapon as a runner, but you've got these incredibly talented running backs in Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. These are capable guys who, on any other team, they could be 1,000+ yard rushers, and that's just not really what Nick Sheridan's offense appears to be designed to do right now, to feed these guys the ball 20 to 30 times a game, especially when Jaylen Milroe has so many RPO options and can run it when he needs to or is designed to. So my question, my frustration watching the team is sometimes let these guys take those hits that Jaylen Milroe is taking. They're built for that. This is their job, and they're also extremely talented. You get them, you pave the way for them. You design these schemes that gets them between the tackles, around the edge. They're fast. They're strong. They're built for it. Give them the ball. See what happens. That's why they're so talented. That's why they came to Alabama to play for Nick Saban, and that's why they stayed to play for DeBoer, to show you what they can do, especially in SEC play. And so I was just glad to see guys like Justice Haynes and Jam Miller and Richard Young at the end of the game, who broke off for a 62-yard run at the end of the game when after Ty Simpson had come in to sort of take the air out of the ball and close the game out. So that was great to see. But the run game has been a big question mark. And honestly, Matt, I think we should sort of transition into talking about Jaylen Milroe right now. I think you have all these people speculating on him. Is he hurt? Is there an undisclosed injury? And I've heard that Jaylen Milroe is even surprised at talk that he might be hurt right now, but nobody really knows. And people are speculating again, something is off. We had Kevin Skarbinsky on a recent episode of this podcast where he said something appears to be off with Jaylen Milroe throwing the ball, making decisions. His pocket presence appears to be just much different than what it was in the first few games of the season. But you have to wonder, when you take hits like he does as a runner, is that starting to amount to something now? And my question is, why wouldn't you give the ball to these guys? So do you think that Alabama might have unlocked something by giving the ball to these running backs and sort of letting them do their thing? Because Alabama had 4 rushers, including Jaylen Milroe, who ran for 50 yards, who had almost 50 yards or more on Saturday.
And a big breakaway play in the rushing game at some point from Kendrick Law, too, by the way,
yep.
who is now healthy and a part of this offense again. It's so complicated to start talking about psychology because there's not going to be any stats that you can look at for that, but it's absolutely a part of the position when it comes to quarterbacks. We've seen it over and over again that guys who are spectacular college quarterbacks, for example, get to the NFL and something breaks in them. It's not that their shoulder quit working. It's not that they don't know how to calculate in their brain how long it takes the ball to get to a receiver. It's just that so much of that position comes down to confidence and these sort of nebulous psychological factors. And once you lose that stuff, it's hard to get it back, and you're not the same player anymore. And look, Alabama fans can watch Bryce Young and as a perfect example, a guy who was utterly spectacular in college and put a team on his back, and he gets to a terrible NFL team, and it suddenly looks like he forgot how to pass the football. I think something, however it happened, something affected Jaylen Milroe between the ears. I think it's possible there was a physical element of it happening too, but you go and look at yesterday, right? He's getting the ball down the field. They took some deep shots. The ball wasn't coming up short. He can still throw the deep ball. He can still throw an intermediate pass. And frankly, it's never been a question of his arm strength. It is more about his ability to see the field and confidently make a decision at the right time. Something has been off about it for the last several weeks. I don't know how it happens in the first place, and I don't know how it gets fixed, but this does happen to people. We've seen it not a ton at Alabama because you haven't had guys go through down periods like this, but in the SEC over the years, you will see a team suddenly catch fire late in the season because something happens to their quarterback and he gets confidence. It is possible that could happen with Jaylen Milroe and that it may have happened to some degree yesterday. I think, as we were talking about at the start of the show, I think sometimes nothing works for an offense until you can establish one thing that can be successful. And that suddenly starts to open everything else back up. So Alabama clearly could not pass the ball to start this game, and they couldn't really run the ball in the middle of the field. And they start looking for things on the perimeter. And they got just enough of those wins that it started to open things up. You put a defense on its heels, and you can suddenly the pass is there. Suddenly there's guys in the flats. Suddenly the running backs are able to make some space for themselves in the middle. It really does feel sometimes like this is a game where if you can do one thing well, it opens up other possibilities for you. And I think if they can get this run game to become a consistent thing for them, Jaylen Milroe's job will become easier. His confidence will improve. Now, as we'll probably get into now, they now have to go do this in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that my follow-up there with Jaylen Milroe is if we're looking at this as sort of like a stock up, stock down kind of situation, because I think that for a lot of people, they've been down on Jaylen Milroe for a lot of the reasons that you've been talking about. But my thought has always been he's still Alabama's best chance to win, just based on like what we've seen him do, the body of work that he has as Alabama's starting quarterback the last season and a half. And he didn't turn the ball over this week. He missed a couple of passes, kind of like he did against Tennessee. I mean, there was one where he had protection in the pocket. There was green grass all around Ryan Williams. He's wide open, and Jaylen Milroe misses him by several yards. And it's just like, wait, what? I thought that we had improved. Like we were seeing improvement here, and that didn't appear to be the case, at least for that one play. But he missed a few throws. But otherwise, I mean, he did have some intermediate passes that it looked really sharp, and he was kind of playing that sort of like Saban sensibility of take what the defense gives you, right? Like if you need to check down, right? And it's a new era, it's a new offense, so we'll forget about the Saban thing, but it just kind of reminded me of that style of play. Protect the ball, take what the defense gives you. But I mean, if you're an Alabama fan, did Saturday give you a vote of confidence about Jaylen Milroe moving forward? Do you think that Alabama still has a chance to like win with him as the quarterback right now?
I think if I'm being honest about how I feel watching it, if Alabama has the ball and they have enough time for one drive and they need to score a touchdown at the end of a game in Baton Rouge, I don't know that I feel good enough about it yet that I would say Jaylen Milroe's got this. They're going to win the game. Now, that doesn't mean they can't get there, but I don't feel that they won this game because of Jaylen Milroe. I think that you're right. He did not make any catastrophic mistakes. On top of the interceptions, right? There have been some other chronic issues this season that we didn't see against Missouri. We did not see him turn a drop back pass into a massive sack for loss that sort of ends the drive effectively. Didn't really see those happening, which has become a pretty chronic issue for Jaylen Milroe. Didn't see any obvious lack of awareness mistakes, right? Throwing the ball into double coverage, things like that. The not knowing that you're about to take a hit and it turns into a fumble. These are things that have been unfortunately kind of consistently happening. They didn't really happen this week. So I think you're right. He limited the disastrous plays and the big mistakes. He's still not quite there in terms of becoming the kind of weapon that we saw him become November of 2023. And to be fair, that didn't really happen until the LSU game last year. So it's entirely possible he's still got it in him. But we need to see more. And he took steps forward this week. I don't know that I would consider him a top tier SEC quarterback right now, but we all have seen him become that. We've seen that he has it within him.
Yeah, and what I like about Jaylen Milroe is like even though you have games like last week against Tennessee where he targets Ryan Williams 100 times, he does have a tendency to spread the love, right? Like he's
Jeremy
throwing
Bernard
it to.
Was a much bigger part of the passing game the past couple of weeks, I would
Yep,
say.
Jeremy Bernard. He's got Ryan Williams. He found Emmanuel Henderson. He found C.J. Dupree, Kendrick Law, Robbie Oots, and Justice Haynes had a reception. And you've seen him find the running backs at various points throughout this season. I mean, he was looking for Kobe Prentice a couple of times on deep balls on Saturday. And so, I think that he does see the field. I think he's looking for multiple receivers. He's not just depending on Ryan Williams and these other safety nets on offense. And so I think that might be also part of the scheme, part of the design that's helping him out in terms of seeing the field and finding other receivers. The point is, he's got weapons. And again, like if he takes what the defense gives him and he checks down if and when he needs to, and he doesn't panic in the pocket, because there were a couple of moments where there were breakdowns in protection, right? And there were blindside sacks on Jaylen Milroe, and Alabama was just lucky that he held onto the ball yesterday, and thankfully they did. But, you're right. Like they didn't have those moments of red zone interception, pick six, strip sack at a critical point in the game. And
intentional grounding from because he's in an impossible spot in the backfield. Yeah.
Right. So there was improvement, right? And he's got a week off, and you got to hope that they've got a good game plan going into Baton Rouge. We'll get into that in just a minute. But one thing I want to ask you too here before we move on from Missouri. I mean, listen, Alabama did well. I think partially because Missouri's starting quarterback, Brady Cook, he tried to give it a go. I mean, he had a high ankle sprain. He was doubtful at one point during the week. He became a game time decision, and he played. But he hurt his hand in the game. Missouri went through a couple of more quarterbacks, and they didn't have their leading rusher. They were banged up. So, you look at this and you think, well, Alabama played a banged up team. Like Missouri was not at 100%, but that's just the nature of football. A lot of teams are banged up right now.
Especially at the end of October, it is.
Yeah, for sure. And so, but the question is that, they did get a shutout, and the defense has been under scrutiny in 2024 so far for good reason, obviously. But when you pitch a shutout against a ranked SEC team, how can you give them anything but a good grade? Did it look like Alabama's defense had kind of fixed itself this week?
Honestly, there's reason to believe they were getting there last week. I know nobody's going to feel good about that Tennessee game. It was a great game for the Alabama defense. It really was. They had multiple turnovers. They did everything they could in that game to put the offense in a position to succeed and win that game. And I know that the third downs were still a chronic issue a week ago, but overall, a really solid game from the Alabama defense in Knoxville, and they continued that into this week. And really, I think you could go back and look at the South Carolina game too, that there were big moments where they came up with a huge play when they needed to. There's a lot to feel good about with this Alabama defense right now. And Ben, on top of everything else, you talked about teams being banged up. This Alabama defense has actually had some pretty severe injury issues. They lose Keon Sabb for what they said was quite a while. And a guy who's not a very heralded player stepping into his place at safety comes up with an interception yesterday. One of 3 interceptions in this game. And I think the most encouraging moment in a lot of ways, even though it was purely symbolic, is that drive at the end of the game where Missouri gets very close to the goal line and Kane Womack sends in the first stringers again on defense at the goal line, and they get the stop. And I know there's been a lot of online discourse this week about momentum and whether it's real in sports or not. And my argument with this is sports is played by people with brains that do not think logically all the time. And if you believe that things are going your way, and if you believe that somehow you're the one that's going to be successful and not the other guy, you have an edge and you play differently. And I think Alabama's defense right now is playing with confidence. They believe they're going to make big plays. And that is a necessary part of success. You do have to have some kind of psychological edge. I think they're playing with a ton of energy and confidence right now going into this LSU game. And a week ago, I would have said this LSU team looks like they have all the momentum in the world. And now I think they're going to be feeling kind of bad about themselves going into this game. They just got stomped by Texas A&M. They're missing some key players, particularly on the defensive side. And this Alabama team might be starting to regain their confidence at the right time.
Like you said, confidence is key, and the defense has to come away with a boost of confidence. I mean, Missouri was 3 of 13 on third down, 0 of 1 on fourth down, which was obviously that fourth and goal situation. Alabama held them to 239 yards of total offense, including 72 yards passing. So, job well done by the defense. And so, Matt, I mean, let's look forward a little bit here. So, like, they go to Baton Rouge after a bye week. And if they win in Baton Rouge, the playoff suddenly becomes a thing again, realistically, right? I mean, after last week, you had people just ready to shut it down. I mean, this is not a playoff team. This season is a wash. But if they finish the regular season at 10-2, they are a playoff contender. And so I do think, though, Matt, that there's a cynical way to look at this season, right? If you just kind of like look at each game in like the context of each of them, Alabama beat a cupcake in Western Kentucky. They struggled for 3 quarters against South Florida. They beat Wisconsin when Wisconsin didn't have their starting quarterback for most of the game. They almost blew it against Georgia. They lost to Vandy. They struggled and almost blew it to South Carolina. They lost an ugly game to Tennessee where seemingly everything went wrong, and then they just beat a banged-up Missouri team. But a win is a win, and they're 6-2. So, Matt, I mean, going into Baton Rouge and for the rest of this season, and you look at like what all is on Alabama's schedule. They play LSU, they play Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn. Rating it 1 to 10, where are you on the confidence meter with Alabama that they finished the regular season at 10-2?
Well, this is a cop-out answer, but I'm going to feel vastly different depending on how the LSU game goes. That's it for me. The LSU game is going to tell us the story. And that's not, I hate to be dismissive of the Iron Bowl in that way, but if this Alabama team could go into Baton Rouge and beat LSU, I think they can handle easily their remaining 3 games. If they lose to LSU, there's a lot of reason to expect these guys could start to hang it up and get frustrated. And then the Iron Bowl and even the Oklahoma game are kind of up in the air to me. So I think one thing depends on another. And I think that my answer to this is I'll say it's a toss-up going into the LSU game. And then depending on the result of that, I think the potential for the remainder of the season varies wildly.
So it's not so much a cop-out, Matt. You're saying if they beat LSU, then they probably finish 10-2.
That's
right?
what I think. That's what even though Auburn may have shown some signs that they're figuring some things out yesterday, it was against a pretty bad team that can't really do much to compete with them. And I think Alabama, provided they are playing with a healthy mindset, they should beat Oklahoma and Auburn.
Should, right? I mean, you would think, and I think people were probably a little skeptical about this past Saturday. And I was out and about in Tuscaloosa. There were a lot of Missouri fans there, a lot. Like, I was kind of surprised by it. But I mean, like, I think this was the second time Missouri has played in Tuscaloosa since they joined the SEC. I believe they played in 2018, and I think that was also an Alabama homecoming game. I could be wrong. But you get a chance to come to Tuscaloosa and visit the Alabama campus and go to Bryant-Denny Stadium. You probably should. At the same time, I think that there's blood in the water with Alabama, right? And these fan bases and these teams.
It's a gettable game. Yeah.
They might sense it, and that suddenly becomes a really fun trip in Tuscaloosa if you can walk out of there with an upset. But it didn't happen. Alabama beat them 34-0, and I hope they enjoyed their trips home from Tuscaloosa because, that wasn't the result of that. I'm sure a lot of them were, we're better than Vandy. We beat Vandy. I saw a sign at SEC Nation that said real football teams don't lose to Vandy, and they had the Alabama score and they had the Missouri score, and they did.
Everybody loves to joke about Vandy this year until it's your turn. So we'll see.
Yeah, you think Texas is joking about Vandy?
Nope, they didn't have a good time at all yesterday.
But they walked out of there with the win. Alabama didn't, right?
Yeah.
So, but look, it's still there. Like, I think that's the theme of this season, right? Like, even after the Vandy loss, that was sort of the rallying cry. Is like, yes, they lost to Vandy, but it's still in front of them. And yes, they lost to Tennessee.
Nobody's right. Perfect on this field. There's going to be teams in the playoff that have losses that everybody looks at and says, that's a bad loss. Doesn't matter because it's a new time. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, a not very good Northern Illinois team, and they're probably going to be in the playoffs.
Well, and who do you think, like, when all is said and done, if Alabama is 10-2, and like, let's say there are multiple 10-2 teams in the SEC, which is a scenario that could happen, if they're having those conversations, who has the best schedule? Alabama has what a lot of people perceived as a bad loss in Vandy, but we just saw Texas struggle. They got out of there with a win, but they just struggled, and it could have been the other way too. But who's going to have the best win in that conversation? And Alabama, I think, probably has the best win right now, beating Georgia in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
And if they get into this conversation deep enough, they're also going to have a win on the road at LSU in that scenario. It's a schedule that provides them with enough opportunities to make a good argument to get in over another SEC team.
Long way to go, Matt. I mean, it's
sure.
Obviously easier said than done. And when you've got what I don't know what time this game is going to be played, but like a road game in Baton Rouge,
you got to think it's going to be at night for sure.
Probably against a good LSU team. I mean, this is not like a national title contending LSU team, I don't think. But look, they could make it too. But they've got a quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier, and this is going to be tough for Alabama. You know, they're the next toughest and probably the toughest remaining game on the schedule. But you know, that's football. That's, you know, competing for the college football playoff. It's going to be tough. You want to win. You got to beat good teams, and the SEC is where all these good teams are. So we will see what happens in Baton Rouge in a couple of weeks. Alabama's got to bye. They can recover, and they can plan for what is going to be another absolute showdown between those two programs. So, Matt, let's take a break. We'll come back. We're going to do some more blind rankings, so stick with us here on Beat Everyone. All right, Matt, time for some more blind rankings. And listen, I want to clarify something here because I've been reading in the Instagram and Facebook comments like, why didn't you include Devontae Smith in the wide receiver list? Because he wasn't an unheralded wide receiver, right? Like, why didn't you include Mac Jones in the quarterback? Look, most people know the drill here, but these picks are not every Alabama quarterback, every wide receiver, whatever we're about to cover here. We rank these 5 things without knowing what comes next. I don't know what Matt's about to give me, and he doesn't know what I'm about to give him, but we do our best with what we've got. Matt, I'm going to give you the blind rankings list here now. I'm going with something a little outside the box here. Like, we love college football. We love going to stadiums, whether it's football or sports, whatever it happens to be. Going to a stadium, living it up, win and rum. You don't really care what the prices are, and Lord knows what they are at Bryant-Denny Stadium. I want you to blind rank game day concession food.
Oh, man, I love this.
So rank these game day concession foods without knowing what comes next. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. First one.
I've been preparing for this my whole life.
First one, hot dog.
The Denny dog, I mean, God. Honestly, I know this is maybe strategically not a smart move. I'm going number 1. This is to me this is the quintessential stadium food.
Number 1 off the bat.
Off the bat.
Okay, you don't know what's coming next. All right, next up, cotton candy.
Oof. So look, in Alabama, the vast majority of your games are going to be very hot weather. I can't think of a worse pairing than like 95-degree weather, humidity, and cotton candy. So I'm going 5 for cotton candy.
5 for cotton candy. I feel like cotton candy is kind of like a little more old school thing. I might be showing my age asking you about cotton candy.
That's an indoor. That is an indoor. That's a basketball food. That's an indoor stadium food.
To be quite honest with you, I've also never really understood cotton candy. Like, I've had it. It dissolves in your mouth like some sort of like science fiction experiment. I don't really get it. So I think I might be with you.
You're not really a sweets guy either. So,
well, I might be with you on number 5 there. Okay, let's go to the next one. Soft pretzel.
Ooh, soft pretzel's big time for me. I'm going to put it at 3 just in case you got something else good up your sleeve there.
All right. I'm a soft pretzel guy. Like, I could eat a handful of them in games.
You got a lot of dip options with pretzel too, which is fun.
That's true. You get the beer cheese and some other things. People like mustard on their pretzels. I don't really get that, but I love it. And they've got the big giant German soft pretzel at Alabama games.
Get the piece of salt on there that's like the size of a diamond.
Yeah, it'll cost you your paycheck to get it. But, like I said, when in Rome. All right, Matt, you got 2 more here. Nachos.
Yeah. Well, nachos is good because it's like almost a meal, really. It's almost a hot dog in terms of filling if you really like need an energy boost there. But it's kind of a hassle to eat, kind of a pain. I guess I'm gonna go 4 there because even though I do like nachos, but you cannot be on your feet one-handing nachos during a football game.
How fast does the nacho cheese cool off at a football game too?
Yeah.
Especially,
And it
I mean,
forms a skin on top. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about cold cheese and these yellow tortilla chips or whatever. Like, I like nachos, fine, but I'm kind of with you on the indoor thing.
If we're not to give a specific shout out to a person who did not pay for sponsorship, but there's a certain establishment that does sell barbecue nachos in Tuscaloosa on game day. That's a different product entirely. And I would say that would rank much higher. But if we're talking, I know we're talking about standard stadium nachos, like movie theater nachos.
That's right.
Yeah.
They used to sell it. They don't anymore, and haven't. I don't think ever will again. So we'll pour out some nacho cheese.
Pour one out for Big Bad Wolf nachos.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. All right, Matt. Last one. I think you did pretty well here, but there are people who live and die by these, and there are people who don't understand them and would never buy them at a football game for the rest of their lives. Peanuts.
Oh, I'm a peanut guy. I like the peanuts. Yeah. I'm not a boiled peanut guy, which is very trendy now. The wet peanuts doesn't do it for me. But I mean, that's a classic game day food. We also have all just sort of agreed as a society that you're allowed to throw peanut shells on the ground and it's not trash for some reason, which is kind of fun, I guess. So, and it's like, look, there's protein, it's filling. I think that's a perfect game day food. I'm glad I put hot dog number 1, but I'm okay with peanuts at number 2.
Hot dog at number 1. I think you were smart to do that. It's just so reliable. You want a hot dog every single time you go.
It's a complete meal. It's
a
complete
for
meal
sure.
In and of itself.
One hot dog, a few of. I'm going to make a few of them a complete meal.
No,
but again,
that's fine. Yeah.
I'm emptying my wallet at this point.
But I don't need a side with a hot dog. It's got everything I need.
Well, let me ask you real quick, because you mentioned the peanuts on the ground. Do you leave your trash in the stands, or do you pick it all up and throw it away in a trash can?
I do not leave my trash in the stands. I have heard the argument before that there are people who clean that up. I think that's shameful, and I think that you should spend eternity paying for your sins if you're that kind of person. Pick your trash up and put it in a trash bin on your way out of the stadium.
He's talking to a lot of you, calling a lot of you shameful out there for not picking up your trash, because most people will leave their trash.
They do.
Under
and
their seat.
They leave their cups because they know that the pledge kids are going to go stack up the cups and take them home after the game. I don't think that's okay either.
I'll be honest, I've looked for a souvenir cup. Yeah, I've looked for a souvenir cup in the stands every so often if I didn't buy one that day.
Because the degenerates are going to leave them there.
Oh, my God. Now we're saying degenerates. All right, Matt. Let's be careful here. All right. That's it for – I think you did well. Good job on your blind rankings.
I feel okay about it. Ben, I have a more football-related one for you. And this is in light of the next game on Alabama's schedule, even though there is a bye week upcoming. We're going to be ranking Alabama wins against LSU. And again, you don't know which ones I'm about to throw at you, but these are all Alabama victories versus LSU.
Lots of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in the Saban era. All right.
Okay. I'm ready. Is this Saban era or of all time?
These are all Saban era. Yes.
Okay.
All right. First up, 2015.
2015. That was at Bryant-Denny Stadium. That's when you had Leonard Fournette's Heisman campaign effectively end in real time when he ran for 30 yards. Derrick Henry's launched pretty much, where you just had the inverse. I'm going to go number 4 because that game wasn't particularly close. I mean, it was huge because you talk about a swarm defense. They just crushed Leonard Fournette in that game. And Leonard Fournette had some choice words about his recruiting visit in Tuscaloosa recently, and Alabama fans were quick to remind him about how his games against Alabama went throughout his career. So I love the Leonard Fournette sort of subplot in the Alabama-LSU rivalry, but in terms of wins, in terms of big games, I'm going to put that at number 4.
All right. 2012.
Number 1.
Number
1. It's number 1. It's for personal reasons. I was there. Right, I was sitting in the LSU student section it was just like, you talk about behind enemy lines, Matt. I mean, like, you heard all the terrible things that they say on a weekly basis in that student section, directly aimed at Nick Saban. They said something about a tiger or something where you can do something with it. I'm not going to repeat it here on the airwaves, but I mean, the TJ Yeldon screen pass, something that we've relived over and over, especially with our colleague Eli Gold on Thursdays. I mean, Alabama had lost to Texas A&M. Their season appeared to be over. It was, I might be getting the order wrong. Anyway, it was just a huge win under the lights in Death Valley. It was a completely it's like one of the most hostile environments that I've ever been in. And AJ McCarron finds TJ Yeldon after an incredible drive. He just runs right in front of me into the end zone for the go-ahead touchdown. Then Alabama dominates on defense to close the game out. It just had everything that you want in a college football game. The stakes were as high as they could be. And then Alabama goes on to win the national championship. It's one of the greatest plays in Alabama history. I saw it with my own eyes. Number one.
It was a big one. That was my first game in Baton Rouge ever, actually.
Me too.
2008, Ben.
2008 was a great game. Wow. I mean, I hate to go 1-2 so quickly, but 2008, that's an overtime game. Rashad Johnson has 3 interceptions in it. He basically helps to close it out by intercepting the ball into the end zone. But that's just a back and forth game. That was a day game, actually, in Death Valley. So that game was so good, and that was part of like Alabama reestablishing itself as an SEC power. They had to do it against LSU, who had done the same thing against Alabama in Bryant-Denny at night the year before. I'm going to go number 2. That was a really good game. It's underrated. Not enough people talk about it. It ends with a John Parker Wilson QB sneak to win the game. Fantastic.
Good pick there. All right, we've got the 3 and 5 spots left going into this. 2014.
2014, another phenomenal game. That's Blake Sims leading a comeback similar to A.J. McCarron's drive at the end of the 2012 game. He was unbelievable. I mean, I think there was almost like a minute left in the game. Alabama doesn't have any timeouts, and Blake Sims engineers an unbelievable drive to tie the game at the end. And I think he finds DeAndrew White at the end of the game and sends it into overtime. Am I remembering that correctly?
It does go into overtime, yes.
Yeah, so just an unbelievable game. Gosh, I loved it. I think it was something that helped establish Blake Sims as an Alabama legend at quarterback, another underrated player, unheralded player, as we've talked about on the show. And you said I have the 3 and what spot
the
available?
3 and 5 spots.
Unbelievable game. I'm going 3. 2014, I'm going 3. So I got the 5 spot left.
This is not my list, but I will tell you, 2014 is my personal favorite LSU game.
Did I blow this? What's number 5?
Number 5 is 2016.
2016. Okay, ugly game. Jalen Hurts, there's no offense throughout the game. It's so ugly. I feel fine at this number 5. Nobody can score a touchdown, and then Jalen Hurts finally busts loose for a QB scramble that basically clinches the game. It's low scoring, right? What was that game like? 10-0 or something like that. I can't remember the exact score.
We're pulling it up while we talk right here.
Yeah,
but yes, it was 10-0, and Jalen Hurts's scramble for a touchdown, which really almost identical play to what we would later see him do against Clemson in a national championship game and against Georgia in an SEC championship game.
Thrilling outcome, but the game itself was just so ugly, and neither team could do anything. It wasn't even as entertaining as the game of the century, the first one in 2011 in Bryant-Denny Stadium. I feel fine about this list. I think that's a good number 5.
I think it's good. I like I said, I would have 2014 as my number 1, but I know that's a weird pick. It's just one of those where it's as far gone as I've ever seen Alabama. It's the closest to losing I've ever seen them when they didn't lose.
Yeah, it was just scary, to be in that environment. Like, if you've ever been inside Tiger Stadium, again, at night, when they are just losing their minds, you've never heard sounds like that. Not necessarily like the things that they're saying, but that's obviously part of it. But it's so loud, it's so intimidating, and you think that, there's no way you're getting out of there, right? With a win, certainly, but I mean, it's just, again, it's what college football is all about. I remember walking out of that place and at least watching it in real time and thinking, wow, this place lives up to the hype. It's the real deal.
Hate to hype somebody else on Beat Everyone, but we got it here.
All right, Matt. The blind rankings, love doing them. Let's do some more here in the future. Thanks for doing this again. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe, rate, review. Help us out with that if you don't mind. And for Matt Scalici, Beat Everyone producer, I'm Ben Flanagan. We'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.